Hello everyone, so we're going to talk about a bug that's actually existed since the launch of Tides of Torment, which means that we need to talk about CA's patching lately. Because it is quite important, and for that we need to start a brand new campaign with Kholek Sun Eater. Yes, Tides of Torment kind of screwed him over. You see, when you start a campaign with a Warriors of Chaos faction, the general gist is you'll take over the first Dark Fortress right in front of you, and a nearby Norscan faction would then be vassalized by you, meaning that you'll have a pretty useless paperweight that does funnel some cash to you. The Warriors of Chaos earn a lot of money, at least in the early game, through vassals constantly supplying funds. That's literally all the vassals do. But not only that, they do act as a bit of a buffer. You can't control the vast majority of settlements because the Warriors of Chaos can only control Dark Fortresses. You want a vassal to feed settlements with, and most importantly, you want a vassal that can handle Chaos Corruption. The Norscan factions are the only ones that can really handle Chaos Corruption. You can pick up other vassals. You can get an Ogre, you can get a Greenskin, but eventually they will have rebellions and that will actually provide a bit of a negative towards you. So what happened here is the release of Sail. Sail moved around some factions, and what happened there meant that this is now historical land for a sub-faction in the new area. This is what happens when a map expansion kind of changes stuff around, meaning that that small sub-faction in essentially the Dolgan historical territories are going to be killed off by Tamokan, and then Tamokan's going to come straight down for you. They're no longer going to be the faction that you're going to vassalize from the very beginning and kind of plan ahead of what's going to go from there. If you want to take all the other lands around this area, if you want to just get your vassal, you're going to have to push all the way to Sail's start, which is a massive divergence from what your normal campaign would be. You would deal with Tamokan a little bit, then you'd go down and deal with Grimgor, as we are aware that Grimgor has a pretty hyper-aggressive campaign AI. I spent time testing this with multiple difficulties, so easy, normal, hard, and very hard, just to kind of see how it was going. It was a bit of a slog and needlessly pointless. Keep in mind that the Warriors of Chaos mechanic is kind of centered around getting yourself some vassals, and it sucks when you don't have that support feature. If you take settlements, any of those settlements up north or to your east, you can't automatically give it to a vassal. You're going to have to use that awful trade feature, which, let's be honest, doesn't work too well. I mean, some of the features for the Warriors of Chaos in general don't work too well, especially with the massive lack of Dark Fortresses on the map to give you a more stylized and incentive way to be more aggressive in your campaign. This does mean, depending on your difficulty, you might get your first vassal between turns 3 to around turn 8. I tried it a few times. It does depend on how fast you can move and whether or not certain other factions just decide to kill you off quickly. Grimgor being the weirdest factor here, and also, yeah, Tamokan coming straight down. He's going to push straight down to try and take your territories very, very quickly, as he is one of your starting enemies. You're also going to have to take settlements that you're not going to need, which you can trade off later, but it is just more needless clicking that really shouldn't really exist. And this is the big issue. Your vassals are going to start having control issues. This is on hard, by the way. Already, this minor faction of Greenskins is suffering from it. They're going to get a rebellion, and in some cases, that rebellion, more often than not, will kill off your vassals, because I don't know if a lot of people have noticed, but the AI just kind of dies out the moment they become your vassal. They'll become less active, sure they'll do something, but their reaction time is dramatically slowed down to what it normally is. Which is why it's generally not worth having non-chaos factions as your vassal. They don't know how to handle a rebellion coming in some cases. It's pretty weird that this has happened, not gonna lie. I kind of played around like an AI would and see how things would go, and yeah, you know, Tamokan came in straight in really quick, but without having that buffer zone to kind of keep an eye on what was going on, I was more focused on Grimgor and taking out that Ogre and Greenskin faction just so I could have some extra cash coming in. The armies for the Chaos Warriors are not cheap, unless Creative Assembly have done this by design, where Kholek specifically just needs to slow down. We've had issues like this in the past, and like I said, this actually happened at the same time where Dakala the Denied One and Aisling, so for the High Elves and Slaanesh in Tides of Torment, they had major issues with their campaign. If you lost your special settlement, so your outpost or your Palace of Pleasure, unfortunately that basically meant game over. That was fixed after a while, but it's kind of sad that that went through for the launch of the DLC. Creators didn't notice this because, well, you need to actively lose one of those settlements, which in most cases the creatives have been playing for a while, but you'd think that this would be tested through testing, especially where it could just derail a campaign pretty early on. Or in regards to Kholek, it could derail it pretty much halfway through, and then you're going to have to start a campaign all over again. I know for a fact that the Kholek stuff was reported a little bit after launch. I don't know about the Aisling one, mostly because Aisling is just pretty simple, but yeah, you know, those issues popping up can cause problems. The Kholek stuff, I can kind of understand why it fell through the radar, but this would have had to be tested, right, if stuff had to be moved around. Though it is important to note that Creative Assembly did, of course, delay the DLC a number of times, so it does look like stuff had been changed so much that, yeah, some things do fall on the cracks. I'm not saying to justify the issue, but it is understandable that these issues do pop up. The big question, however, is as follows. The question is, when does this get fixed? We've had a massive change when it comes to the fixes lately, with hot fixes being more centered around high impact issues, and even then it's been relatively slow. Then patches coming in to fix bug fixes, but they're becoming less and less frequent. And finally, the big updates. They've separated everything into 3 sections, but it does feel like we're getting stuff a little bit slower. And I think that's my biggest bugbear about this issue. It's not so much the issue itself, it's the fact that these issues are kind of popping up a little bit too frequently. Same thing with like the siege issues or the AI issues, or hell, you know, some people have been reporting the bloom issues on snow maps once again. And I'm not going to use the excuse that some people are using. It's like, oh yeah, they're too busy with Med3 and 40k. It's clearly not the case. They're working on everything depending on how, where, and how much is needed. But it's something that needs to be looked at. Maybe the patches aren't really grabbing too much. The hot fixes aren't really coming up as often as people would like. In fact, hot fixes very recently have been just fixing one thing, one possibility of a crash, or just kind of fixing up the issue of not always having to be online, which shouldn't have been the case for this game anyway when it launched. It's ridiculous that that was the case. But hey, better late than never. I just wanted to talk about that today because someone mentioned it in my stream and I played Kholek for a bit. I've not been able to stop thinking about it. It is a clear problem. I hope Creative Assembly can fix that up as soon as possible. I mean, I'm assuming at this point likely won't get any more patches until 8.0 or 8.1 if it's too late for that, depending on when they decide to release Beshiva. It's likely that this mistake was an honest one by Creative Assembly. I guess they didn't realize that that could happen. But it's important, I think, when map updates happen to kind of just look at the factions around those areas and see how they could potentially be affected. Again, not a big deal. If it gets fixed soon, great. You know, I don't imagine Kholek being too interesting. Cue the people in the comments saying that they love Kholek. But I just wanted to highlight this situation. Again, mistakes do happen, so hopefully it just gets fixed soon. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a bit of a discussion. And yeah, I'll speak to you all very soon, guys. Have a good day. Bye.